Indeed, definitely not. Not pressing the wrong buttons, definitely not.
No one here does that at all.
Exactly, it's highly professional already. Well, we have with us now, we have David Ledain. How are we, David?
Good morning or good afternoon. Very well, thank you.
I know, it's afternoon already.
It's afternoon, Chris.
I know, that's really disparaging. So, how are you?
I'm very well.
Excellent.
Had a good drive in until I got to Brighton seafront, and then it was all a bit,
Exactly.
you know what it's like.
Yeah, so let's...
On behalf of the Republic, we apologise.
Indeed. So let's just get straight in there. So you're here to talk about your new book, Gay Dad.
Sure.
Now, what's it about, for those of us who don't know?
Well, it's a collection of 10 true stories of gay divorced men who have kids who are living in the UK today. And one of those stories is mine. And do you want me to tell you how I came about to write?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Sure. So when I was going through the process of separating and coming to terms with my sexuality, I guess, I was looking on the internet for other stories of other men in a similar situation. But all I could find was celebrity stories, celebrities coming out, and very much American-based as well. So there would be sports stars and such like, or adopted single-sex couples looking to adopt children, but nothing based in this country, and stories about, guys who live in the UK. So I sort of was looking around desperately, couldn't find anything, and then I found an internet support group called Gay Dads UK, which is purely a support group for gay dads.
We'll put a link up on the Facebook, don't worry.
Sure, that'd be great.
Sorry,
that'd be great. That's not run by me, by the way, that's a separate, organisation.
Yeah.
But, and I was just amazed to find that there were these other guys, in all sorts of walks of life, all different backgrounds, all different social, backgrounds and such like. And I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we got some of us together to actually write a book that I wanted to be able to read.
Yeah, and kind of helped give you a story, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And when I put the muted the proposition, I was inundated with stories, and it was because it's a very cathartic thing to tell your story, and for the first time you are allowed to tell it in a safe environment, and so I just collected these 10 different stories and was amazed about how different these people were. But of course the thread and the theme is the same. It's about being gay, going into a marriage, and then having children, and then the whole thing sort of unravelling.
That's amazing. So
if I understand rightly, the common bit is the divorce came about because of a revelation, the coming out of the closet. Is that right, or is there something else that causes the divorce?
No, it is the sexuality that obviously causes the divorce and the separation.
So people went into these marriages either not aware of their gender preference or discovering it during the marriage itself?
Some, and I think a lot of guys, myself included, were in denial.
Yes.
I went into marriage and I just thought that was something that I could deal with, and it was separate from my marriage and the person that I loved.
Yes.
And I had no inclination that would impact on the marriage.
Is that true of all 10 stories, that these people like yourself had partners, had close personal lovers alongside the marriage, or does the story vary?
I didn't have an outside partner.
Sorry, I was just about to say.
Yeah,
I clearly missed that one from. Sorry.
No. Some guys had affairs in exactly the same way that heterosexual couples have affairs. Mm-hmm. Others didn't, and didn't sort of experiment or investigate their sexuality, if you like, until their marriage was dissolved. I had experiences and relationships with men, and when I went into my marriage, my wife knew that. And I think, again, going back to this naivety, I think we both went into it naively. I thought that it wouldn't affect the marriage, and she thought, although I'm not wanting to talk on her behalf, and indeed
definitely.
The book is not the wives' story, but I think it is a general theme that the wives have a notion that perhaps they can change the man. And I think this is true in heterosexual marriages as well. If there's something that perhaps you don't like about a person, you think, being really close to them and living with them, you can in some way sort of influence them.
I think for me it's quite powerful as well, especially because you kind of hear about this happening quite a lot. I mean, the one that springs to mind is Gareth Jenkins, or the rugby player, Welsh rugby player.
Yeah.
Gavin Jenkins, I think is his name. I don't know his name, unfortunately, off the top of my head. Who said exactly that? I mean, you said that these things are predominantly in America, and you predominantly have these role models. But do you think that that's important as part of it? Is these, like yourself, gay men coming out and opening up and saying...
Absolutely. I mean, some people say... it's fair enough, guys holding hands in public or kissing in public, but it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. And until it becomes absolutely normal and people don't react in any way, homophobic or otherwise, then I think we have to keep plugging it. And, there's this notion that where America leads, we tend to follow. Culturally, I don't know why that is. But indeed, there are more stories coming out of men who went into marriage and who have since come out.
I mean, without kind of prying too much, I mean, what was your... I mean, how do your children feel about it? Or Charlotte? So,
well, in all the cases, the children, they're very astute and they're very in the moment, and they get on with things.
Yeah.
They take on board the information, and then basically that's it. And in some relationships they question. I think it very much depends on their age.
Yeah.
And also one of the main concerns, especially with teenagers, is bullying at school.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this fear, that their school friends will find out.
So are there stories within the 10 examples that showcase young children or teenagers being bullied?
No, I mean the stories are basically the men's stories. Yeah. So obviously they do talk about their children, they talk about their wives, but it doesn't come from their perspective. It's just the dad's perspective.
That's understandable. So I mean, for the interesting thing for me is when you've got to this point. So when did you have the idea? When did it come from a thing of Googling and kind of working out what I needed to find, finding these stories, to actually writing the story itself? How long did that process take? Was it years or months? Or?
No, actually it was very quick. I'm also a writer. I write fiction as well under another name. I'm
joking, sorry.
But because the stories were being supplied, it's not like writing fiction. I didn't have to imagine anything or make anything up. Obviously, there was a certain amount of editing, and I had to tidy them up. But the stories are very much the men's voices that come through
as themselves.
Yeah.
And you were saying as well that you changed names. Is that just to protect the people themselves, just so that there's not too much family repercussions?
Exactly. Some of the men were perfectly happy to have their real names put to their stories. Some were less so. So I just thought the easiest thing is just to put, make it entirely anonymous, so that if there's wives or children involved or parents or whatever, they needn't be affected.
So does that mean that in the book itself, your story is anonymous as well? It's
absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why. Okay, right. Okay, no problem.
And I mean, there is a story in there titled "This is David's story," but that's not my story.
See, that's great. So that's really interesting. It also makes sense why So I won't pry anymore. But I mean, I suppose.
Well, I'm happy to tell you my story.
Would you?
I think we'd be interested because I'm conscious that we're in Brighton and Hove, and the awareness of identity preferences and so on, that's reasonably well discussed, and actually, I'm pleased to say, reasonably well accepted comparatively.
Yeah.
What becomes interesting about your book is because you've used the word dad, which implies parenthood.
Yeah.
So what I'm asking is, what is the difference here? What is the uniqueness that comes from being a father in touch with your gender, with your sexuality, thank you, Chris, in touch with your preferences, having gone through this awareness-raising thing of being in the relationship and then ending and divorcing that relationship. What is it about being a dad that becomes unique in all these 10 stories?
Gosh.
That's a really difficult question, sorry.
and yet your book is called Gay Dad, rather than just becoming gay, which of course is an interesting thing in its own right.
Yes, because the stories are, it's a unique story, I felt, because I couldn't find anything out there that documented it.
I would agree.
I mean, we all know anecdotal stories and we all hear these stories, but to me, I couldn't find other men who were like me. As I said before, there were celebrities, sports stars, or whatever.
Yes.
And the only gay icons that I had when I was growing up were people like Larry Grayson, or these sort of made up characters, if you like, vaudeville characters.
So what I'm wondering about, because I come from a point where, although I happen to be heterosexual, which is really by the by, I've been through the single parent thing. Yeah. I've been through the divorce equivalent. I've brought up a child by myself for large tracts of the time by myself. So I'm aware of a single parent and a male single parent perspective. Yeah. What I'm wondering about is, because you, quite rightly, you said, there you were, and suddenly you kind of felt on your own. You looked online, you couldn't find other people who were saying, I'm a dad, I am gay. And you went out, which I think is worth celebrating, and collected these stories. Having this privileged position of seeing these 10 stories, what is it you can share? What little pearls can you share that is unusual, that makes it different about being a dad and being gay?
To an extent, and to a great extent, I don't think that there is a lot of difference between you and I. You were a single parent, and I am now a single parent, so our parenting is a completely separate and different thing. Yeah, but our sexuality is what makes us unique. So I was dealing with my sexuality. I wasn't dealing with being a parent, but the stories are a collective of what it means to go into a marriage, questioning your sexuality, some even knowing that their sexuality is homosexual rather than heterosexual, and then having to deal with all that. But what came across in the book is that all the men, myself included, married for exactly the right reason, and that's because we loved the person that we married. It just happened that person was female rather than male.
That's really nice, though. I personally think that's wonderful, actually, and I think it could be so easily misconstrued as from an outsider. I think that people, I would say cynical people, most definitely would think that it's a sham, hiding it, and I don't think that's true. I think if you're going to be willing to get married, from my perspective, I think you in that moment you couldn't do it for a sham. I got married very recently, and I felt when I was up there, I was under no illusion that one day my wife and I might break up, we might fall out of love, things might change, but in that moment, it was us, it was us, and I think that's a really important point. I think what I'd love to ask, if you're feeling comfortable, is what's your story? And briefly, if you want to say it.
No, I'm perfectly happy to. So briefly, I going back to when I was married, or before I was married, I would have considered myself bisexual then, because I had girlfriends, and sleeping with girls wasn't a problem, and I was, I had relationships with women, and so I would have classed myself as bisexual then. But, given this was the 80s, and to be gay was very taboo, and it was very difficult, because we had the whole AIDS thing, and we'd just come out of the 70s, and to be gay was, although it was legal, it wasn't legal until you were 21. And so it was very, very difficult. So I think had I had a social circle that was gay friendly, or other gay people that I could relate to, maybe I would have taken that path. But to me, I thought I was bisexual. So I married the girl that I loved, and we went into marriage. And as you say, when you're walking up the aisle, you don't for 1 minute think that this marriage is going to end in a year or 2 or 10 or 20.
Yeah.
You go into it, this is for life.
Exactly.
But as I said, maybe naively, I thought, because I thought I was bisexual, I wouldn't say I'm bisexual now, I'd say I'm gay and that's it. Maybe, I just thought that I could control that. But I think, all this bisexual, gay, we try and put labels on people. And we try and fit people into boxes. And I was trying to fit myself into a box.
Yeah.
And I was trying to make everybody happy, myself included. And I thought, that this was the way forward.
Do you think that there was, I suppose quickly, I'm just aware of time, but
Sure.
Do you think there was an element of shame to it, to actually turn around and, without putting too much stress on the parenthood side of things, but in terms of you personally, do you think there was an element of shame of not wanting to come forward and admit it for you yourself, or was it a social pressure, do you think?
I'm not so sure about shame.
Shame maybe is the wrong word. Maybe that's putting the words in your mouth.
Sure.
I suppose, uncertainty, I suppose.
It's just easier, isn't it, to fit in with the norm.
Yeah.
So I had a group of friends who, to my understanding, who knows, were all heterosexual, and they were all getting together with partners and all marrying each other, and you start going to weddings and engagement parties and so forth, and you go on holiday with other couples. So the whole social aspect is heterosexual.
Yeah.
And then to stand up and say, actually, I don't fit into this, goodbye, because that is what you have to be prepared to do. You have to be prepared to step away. It's not an easy task, and I know perhaps it's easier these days, but again, I think it very much depends where you live and your social network.
Well, I think that's as Andy said earlier, I think it's wonderful, and I think it should definitely be celebrated. I think that we live in the way, who was it? It was Lucy. We have another person that comes in occasionally, who talks about different issues, and one of them is
Robinson,
Lucy Robinson. Yeah, she was talking about heteronormality and homonormality, and the fact that there is no homonormality. There's heteronormality, and everything is kind of based on that. Everything's judged on that. And places in Brighton's obviously very welcoming and stuff like that. I suppose one last question is, with Pride and stuff coming, being gone, how important, was that particularly important to you to celebrate that, or was that something that you take your children along to, or, would you bring your children and your family into your world now?
Possibly not. It's not something. It's not really my. I'm not on the scene. I don't do the scene.
Yeah.
That's not my thing really. But I just think the more that we can talk about it, the more that it can be out there and celebrated, as you say, the better for everybody.
Exactly.
Because we are all different, and I think this sexuality thing is much more part of your personality.
Yeah.
And you don't ask someone to change their personality or to be like somebody else.
Yeah.
And so why should we ask people to change their sexuality?
No, I agree. I think it's that's the most important message, isn't it? So when can we buy this book?
You can get this book on Amazon and Kindle, and you can look up my Facebook page and Twitter account, which is @GayDadBook.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming in, David. I really, really, really appreciate it. It's been really interesting, and I've got loads of questions. I wish we could talk more. However, instead, we're going to actually carry on, and we're going to play In Waves by Slow Club. Enjoy.